My name is Brooke Watson. I'm 24 years old now, and I need to tell you about the night that destroyed everything I thought I knew about family. At 17, I was abandoned in the cold over a lie. They never realized that pushing me away was their biggest mistake. I still remember the cold biting my skin harder than their words ever did, standing outside my childhood home with nothing but a duffel bag and a false accusation that would change my life forever. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because what I'm about to share with you is something I've never spoken about publicly until now. If you've ever been betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect you, hit that subscribe button and drop a like. You're going to want to see how this story unfolds. The front door slammed behind me with a finality that echoed through the quiet suburban street. I could see my mother's silhouette through the frosted window, her arms crossed, her decision made. My stepfather Richard stood beside her, his face twisted with disgust and certainty, certain that I had done something unforgivable. The porch light flickered once, then went dark, as if the house itself was erasing me from its memory. I stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, waiting for someone to open that door and say they'd made a mistake. Nobody came. At 17 years old, I learned that love is conditional. I learned that family can choose comfort over truth, reputation over their own child. The January wind cut through my jacket as I picked up my bag and walked toward the sidewalk, each step taking me further from the only life I'd ever known. I didn't cry that night. I was too shocked, too numb, too focused on the simple act of putting one foot in front of the other. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would forge me into someone they could never have imagined. The lie started with my stepsister, Claire. She was 19, 2 years older than me, and had always resented the attention I got from our mother. If you've been through something similar, leave a like, and keep watching for the next shocking twist in my story. What Claire told our parents that December afternoon was calculated, cruel, and completely false. She claimed I had stolen $2,000 from her savings account and used it to buy drugs. The accusation was so absurd, so far from who I was, that I actually laughed when she first said it. That laugh became evidence of my guilt in their eyes. I tried to defend myself, tried to show them my clean record, my good grades, the fact that I'd never even touched alcohol. But Claire had prepared her case carefully. She showed them fabricated bank statements, text messages from a number I didn't recognize, even a small bag of what she claimed was marijuana that she'd found in my room. My mother looked at me with eyes full of disappointment rather than questions. Richard, who had never fully accepted me as his daughter anyway, saw this as confirmation of what he'd always suspected, that I was trouble waiting to happen. The trial lasted less than an hour, and the verdict was already written before I'd said a word. When I begged them to believe me, to at least investigate before making a decision, my mother's response shattered something fundamental inside me. "Brooke, the evidence is right here," she said quietly, gesturing to Claire's manufactured proof spread across the dining table. "I raised you better than this, and I'm heartbroken, but I can't have this in my home." Those words, "I can't have this in my home," reduced me to a problem to be removed, not a daughter to be protected. That night didn't just break my heart. It erased my old life completely, taking with it my identity, my safety, and my belief that truth always finds a way to surface. One false accusation spread faster than I could defend myself. Claire's story didn't stay within our family. Within days, it had reached my school, my friends, and the tight-knit community where we lived. She told people I had a drug problem, that I'd been stealing from the family for months, that our parents had finally had enough. Make sure you're subscribed, because what comes next is absolutely crazy, and you won't believe how deep this betrayal actually went. I watched my reputation disintegrate in real time, saw former friends cross the street to avoid me, heard whispers following me down school hallways during those final few days before I left. What made Claire's lie so effective was how perfectly she'd engineered it. She knew I had no way to prove a negative. How do you prove you didn't do something when fabricated evidence says you did? She'd accessed my phone while I was sleeping and sent messages to herself from my number, creating a digital trail that looked damning. She'd planted that bag in my room weeks earlier, waiting for the perfect moment to discover it. The bank statements were sophisticated enough that my parents never questioned them, never called the bank to verify, never gave me the benefit of doubt that every child deserves. Claire had transformed herself into the victim and me into the villain with surgical precision. The worst part wasn't just the lie itself. It was watching people choose to believe it. My best friend since middle school, Jessica, blocked my number without asking for my side of the story. My guidance counselor, who'd written me glowing college recommendation letters just months before, looked at me with pity and disappointment during our final meeting. Even my biology teacher, Mr. Harrison, who'd always praised my work, seemed relieved when I stopped showing up to class. No one asked questions. They only wanted someone to blame, someone whose downfall would serve as a cautionary tale. Silence became their verdict, and exile became my sentence, handed down by a jury that never heard the defense. The first night alone was the longest of my life. I'd walked to a 24-hour diner about 2 miles from my house, my phone dead, my wallet containing exactly $43, my mind racing through impossible scenarios where this would somehow be okay. The waitress, a tired-looking woman named Donna with kind eyes, let me sit in a corner booth nursing a single cup of coffee for hours without asking questions. As my body froze from the January cold that had seeped into my bones, my mind stayed painfully alert, cycling through shock, disbelief, anger, and a dawning realization that nobody was coming to save me. I kept waiting for my phone to ring, for my mother to call and say they'd figured it out, that they knew Claire had lied. But my phone stayed silent even after I found an outlet and charged it. Around 3 a.m, I realized begging for love would only shrink me further, that the version of myself who sought their approval had to die right there in that diner booth, the Brooke who cared what they thought, who needed their validation, who believed family was supposed to be safe. She couldn't survive what was coming. I felt something hardening inside my chest. Not quite anger yet, more like a shell forming around the soft parts of me that had been too exposed, too vulnerable. That was the first moment I chose survival over approval. I counted my money again, this time not with panic, but with strategy. $43, a duffel bag of clothes, a winter coat that wasn't warm enough, and a mind that refused to shut down despite my exhaustion. Donna brought me a plate of toast around 4 a.m. and saying quietly, "It's on the house, honey. Whatever you're going through, you're gonna need your strength." I thanked her, ate slowly, and began making a list on a napkin. Shelters in the area, friends' houses where I might stay temporarily, jobs I could get without a permanent address. The old Brooke had died. The new one was being born out of necessity, fear, and a stubborn refusal to let this be the end of my story. The first week taught me how hunger sounds when no one cares. It's not the dramatic stomach growling you hear in movies. It's a constant ache that makes your head foggy and your limbs heavy. I'd found a youth shelter that took me in temporarily, a crowded place with bunk beds and strict rules about curfew and conduct. The other kids there had their own stories of abandonment, abuse, and survival, and for the first time, I didn't feel uniquely cursed. I learned to stretch a $1 menu meal across 2 days, to save the free soap from the shelter bathroom, to sleep with my bag tucked under my head, because trust was a luxury none of us could afford. Every small win felt like stealing life back inch by inch, getting a part-time job at a grocery store, even though I had to lie about having a stable address, saving enough for a cheap prepaid phone so potential employers could reach me, finding a laundromat where the owner, an elderly Korean woman named Mrs. Kim, let me do my laundry for free if I helped her fold clothes for other customers. These victories were invisible to the outside world, but they were everything to me. Each one proved that I could function without my family's support, that their rejection hadn't destroyed my ability to take care of myself. I kept a notebook where I tracked every small success, needing tangible proof that I was moving forward, not drowning. Independence wasn't empowering at first. It was terrifying. I'd wake up in the middle of the night gripped by panic, realizing that if I got sick or hurt, there was no one to call. The shelter had a 3-month maximum stay policy, which meant I had a ticking clock over my head. My 18th birthday was approaching in March, just 2 months away, and with it would come aging out of the few youth services I could access. Some nights I'd walk past my old house, standing across the street in the darkness, watching the warm lights in the windows and imagining Claire in my old room, my mother cooking dinner, everyone pretending I'd never existed. Those moments almost broke me. But then I'd remember the cold calculation in Claire's eyes when she'd lied, and something fierce would rise up inside me, pushing me forward. While others my age planned prom and graduation parties, I planned how to endure tomorrow. Hit that like button if you think what they did was wrong, and stay tuned because what happens next will show you exactly how much I'd grown. My former classmates were choosing colleges and stressing about SAT scores. I was figuring out how to get my GED while working 30 hours a week and trying to save enough for a security deposit on a room. I'd see their social media posts, beach trips for spring break, acceptance letters, carefree selfies, and feel like I was watching life from behind glass, no longer part of that world. The distance between who I'd been and who I was becoming felt like decades, not months. Pain aged me faster than years ever could. By the time I turned 18 in March, I'd developed skills that most people don't learn until their 30s. How to budget down to the last penny, how to negotiate with landlords, how to keep going when your body is exhausted and your spirit is depleted. I'd learned to read people quickly, to spot the ones who might help versus those who'd take advantage. The shelter's social worker, Marcus, taught me about tenant rights and helped me apply for food assistance. A regular customer at the grocery store, an attorney named Patricia, slipped me information about emancipation and legal resources. These small kindnesses from strangers became my new family, proving that sometimes the people with no obligation to help you are the ones who show up. I stopped expecting rescue and started becoming my own. In April, I moved into a tiny room in a shared house with 3 other people, 2 college students and a single mother. It wasn't much, just enough space for a twin bed and a small desk. But it was mine. I'd paid for it with money I'd earned, signed the lease with my own name, and locked the door with my own key. That night, lying in that cramped room listening to unfamiliar sounds in an unfamiliar house, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, a sense of possibility. Not happiness yet, not peace, but the foundation upon which those things might eventually be built. For the first time since that cold January night, I allowed myself to imagine a future that wasn't just about survival. I promised I would never need their mercy again. It happened one night in late May, 6 months after they'd thrown me out, when I found myself crying in the bathroom at work after a particularly difficult shift. I looked at my reflection in that grimy mirror, exhausted, thinner than I should be, but still standing, and made a vow that would shape everything that followed. Not revenge through words or dramatic confrontations, but through becoming untouchable, through building a life so solid that their opinion of me would become irrelevant. I whispered it out loud to my reflection. They will never have power over me again. That promise became my internal fuel on the darkest days. When I wanted to give up, when the exhaustion felt like drowning, when I saw happy families and felt that familiar ache of loss, I'd remember that promise. It wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about proving to myself that I was more than their worst assumptions. I started taking online courses toward my GED, studying after my shifts ended, my eyes burning with fatigue but my determination stronger. I opened a savings account and watched the numbers grow slowly, painfully slowly, but grow nonetheless. Every deposit was proof that I was building something they couldn't touch, couldn't take away, couldn't diminish with their doubt. The promise changed shape as I grew stronger. Initially, it was fueled by anger and hurt. I wanted them to regret what they'd done, to realize their mistake. But gradually, it transformed into something purer, a commitment to my own worth that had nothing to do with them at all. I stopped imagining the apology I'd receive and started imagining the person I'd become. By summer, I'd gotten my GED with scores high enough to qualify for community college scholarships. I'd been promoted to shift supervisor at the grocery store, earning enough to breathe a little easier. These milestones weren't about them anymore. They were about me keeping my word to myself, honoring that girl who'd looked in the mirror and decided to become unbreakable. Without a family's label, I had to define myself alone. For 18 years, I'd been Brooke, Sarah's daughter, or Brooke, Claire's little sister, or Brooke, the quiet one who gets good grades. Those identities had been stripped away, and in their absence, I had to figure out who I actually was beneath all those assigned roles. It was disorienting at first, like learning to walk again after an injury. I'd catch myself adopting behaviors or opinions that I'd inherited from my mother, then have to pause and ask, is this really what I believe? Or is this just conditioning? Every skill learned felt like adding bricks to a new foundation. I taught myself to cook properly using library books and YouTube videos, discovering I actually enjoyed experimenting with flavors and techniques. I learned basic car maintenance from Derek, one of my housemates, which saved me money and gave me confidence. I started journaling every night, not about what had happened to me, but about who I wanted to become, the values I'd choose for myself, the kind of person I'd be when I had the chance to help someone else. These weren't grand transformations. They were quiet, daily choices to build something authentic instead of just reacting to what had been done to me. I wasn't rebuilding a life. I was redesigning who I was. By fall, I'd enrolled in community college with a partial scholarship and student loans, majoring in business administration because I'd learned that financial stability was freedom. I cut my hair short, bought clothes from thrift stores that reflected my actual taste rather than what my mother had always chosen for me, and started introducing myself to new people with confidence instead of apology. The girl who'd been thrown out in January was gone. In her place was someone harder but also more genuine, someone who'd been broken down to the foundation and rebuilt according to her own blueprint. What happened next shocked everyone, including me, because I was about to discover just how calculated Claire's betrayal had actually been. Pain taught me discipline when love failed to show up. Make sure you're subscribed, because what comes next is absolutely unbelievable, and you'll want to hear how everything I learned during those dark months prepared me for what was about to unfold. Every morning, I woke up at 5 a.m., and not because I was naturally disciplined, but because pain had taught me that consistency was the only armor I had against chaos. I'd go for a run before my classes, not for fitness, but because those early morning miles were when I processed everything. The anger, the loss, the determination. Pain became my most reliable teacher, showing me that I was capable of enduring far more than I'd ever imagined. It sharpened my instincts and killed my need for validation. I learned to trust the uncomfortable feeling in my gut when something wasn't right, to walk away from people who reminded me too much of Claire's manipulation, to value actions over words. My classmates would complain about minor inconveniences, a bad grade, a canceled plan, a disagreement with their parents, and I'd feel the vast distance between their problems and mine. I didn't judge them for it. I just recognized that pain had given me a different lens through which to view the world. It had stripped away my need for constant approval and replaced it with something more valuable, the ability to approve of myself. I stopped asking, why me, and started asking, what now? That shift happened sometime in November, almost a year after I'd been abandoned. I was walking across campus after acing an economics exam when I realized I hadn't thought about my mother or Claire in days. The constant background noise of resentment and hurt had quieted to a distant hum. I was too busy building my future to obsess over my past. Pain had done its work. It had forged me into someone focused, resilient, and clear-eyed about what mattered. I wasn't grateful for what they'd done, but I was beginning to recognize that their betrayal had inadvertently given me something they could never take back, the knowledge that I could survive anything. While they forgot my name, I built a future quietly. No announcements, no proof posted online, no updates for the people who'd watched me fall. I deleted my old social media accounts entirely, cutting ties with that previous life and everyone in it. My rise happened in spreadsheets and grade reports, in scholarships earned and bills paid on time, in the slow accumulation of stability that no one applauds because it isn't dramatic. By my second year of community college, I'd made the dean's list every semester, networked my way into an internship at a local marketing firm, and saved enough to move into a small studio apartment of my own. My growth happened in silence, where real strength forms. There were no witnesses to the night I paid off my first credit card in full, no celebration when I got accepted to transfer to a 4-year university with a merit scholarship. I didn't post about landing a better-paying job as a marketing assistant, or about being able to afford groceries without checking my bank account first, or about finally having an emergency fund. These victories were mine alone, private proof that I'd built something real from absolute nothing. The absence of an audience made them more meaningful, not less. I was doing this for myself, not for validation or revenge. For the first time since that January night, I stopped looking over my shoulder. I'd spent so long in survival mode, waiting for the next disaster, that learning to relax into stability felt foreign. But somewhere during my third year of college, I noticed I was sleeping through the night without nightmares. I had friends who knew nothing about my past, who liked me for who I was now, not who I'd been before. I'd even started dating someone, a kind engineering student named Michael who made me laugh and never pushed when I wasn't ready to share certain parts of my story. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine, built on a foundation that couldn't be shaken by anyone's opinion or betrayal. Stability arrived before happiness, and that mattered more. By the time I graduated from university at 22 with a degree in business administration and a job offer from a respected marketing agency, I'd learned that financial security was the foundation everything else was built on. Happiness could wait, safety couldn't. I moved into a nice one-bedroom apartment in a different part of the city, far from the neighborhood where I'd grown up, far from any chance of random encounters with my past. I furnished it slowly, carefully, choosing each piece myself: a comfortable couch, a real bed frame, kitchen supplies that weren't secondhand. Every item represented a choice, a life I'd designed rather than inherited. I learned peace doesn't clap, it just stays. There were no dramatic moments of triumph, no movie-worthy scenes where everything suddenly felt okay. Instead, peace arrived quietly on a Tuesday evening when I realized I was cooking dinner in my own kitchen, music playing, completely content with my own company. It showed up in the morning when I woke up without anxiety twisting my stomach. In the evenings when I came home to a space that felt safe. My coworkers knew me as confident, capable Brooke, who always met her deadlines and had creative ideas in meetings. They had no idea about the scared 17-year-old I'd been, and that distance felt like freedom. For the first time, I felt safe inside my own life. I had health insurance, a retirement account, good credit, and a network of people who respected me. My boss, Jennifer, had become something of a mentor, teaching me about negotiation and professional growth. I'd reconnected with Patricia, the attorney who'd helped me years ago at the grocery store, and we'd developed an unlikely friendship. These relationships were built on mutual respect, not obligation or blood. They chose to be in my life, and I chose them back. This was what family was supposed to feel like: people who showed up consistently, who celebrated your wins and supported you through challenges. Little did I know, the family I'd left behind was about to shatter that peace. Years later, messages appeared like nothing had happened. It was a Saturday morning in March, almost exactly 5 years after they'd thrown me out. I was having coffee and reviewing a marketing campaign when my phone buzzed with a Facebook message request from a name I hadn't seen in years: my mother, Sarah Watson. My hands started shaking before I even opened it. The message was brief, almost casual. "Brooke, honey, it's been too long. We'd love to hear from you and see how you're doing. Can we talk? I miss you. Love, Mom." I stared at those words, at the casual honey and love, as if 5 years of silence could be erased with a single message. They spoke softly, as if time had erased the damage. Over the next few days, more messages came, from my mother, then from Richard's number, though I suspected my mother was writing them, each one gentle and vague, asking about my life, saying they wanted to reconnect, mentioning that a lot has changed. Not once did anyone mention that cold January night. Not once did anyone say the words, "I'm sorry," or "we were wrong." The messages carried an underlying assumption that I should be grateful for their renewed interest, that enough time had passed for me to forgive and forget. They wanted reconciliation on their terms, without accountability, without even acknowledging what they'd done. That was when I understood how small their power truly was. 5 years ago, their rejection had nearly destroyed me. Now, reading these messages in my own apartment, surrounded by the life I'd built without them, I felt nothing but a distant curiosity. They had no power to hurt me anymore because I'd stopped needing anything from them. I didn't respond immediately, instead letting the messages sit unanswered while I processed this unexpected intrusion. Part of me was curious about what had prompted this sudden outreach after so much silence, but a larger part of me recognized this for what it was: an attempt to rewrite history without doing the hard work of owning their mistakes. What I didn't know yet was that Claire's lies were finally catching up to her, and I was about to learn the truth. They didn't miss me. They missed control. After a week of ignored messages, my mother called directly. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. Her voice sounded older, tired, and there was a desperation underneath the casual tone that I recognized immediately. "Brooke, sweetheart, why aren't you responding to my messages? We just want to see you, to be a family again." That phrase, "be a family again," as if we'd simply drifted apart naturally, as if there hadn't been a specific, brutal moment of rejection. I stayed quiet, letting the silence stretch until she filled it with more platitudes about time healing wounds and moving forward. She wanted absolution without confession, reconciliation without reckoning. Their guilt wasn't remorse, it was discomfort. As the conversation continued, the real reason for her outreach began to emerge in careful coded language. Claire was going through some things, my mother said vaguely. There had been misunderstandings in the past that they were reevaluating. Richard was dealing with health issues and had been reflecting on family. Not once did she admit they'd been wrong. Not once did she acknowledge that they'd thrown out a 17-year-old based on lies. The closest she came was saying, "We all make mistakes, Brooke, and life is too short to hold grudges." She'd positioned my potential unforgiveness as the problem, not their original betrayal. It was masterful deflection, and 5 years ago, it might have worked on me. I no longer needed them to understand my worth. "Mom," I said quietly, interrupting her mid-sentence. "Why now? Why after 5 years of complete silence do you suddenly want to reconnect?" The question hung in the air, and I heard her intake of breath, the pause as she calculated her response. "Because you're my daughter, Brooke. You'll always be my daughter." But I wasn't. Not really. Not in any way that mattered. I was the woman I'd built myself into, with no help from her, no guidance from Richard, no family support whatsoever. Whatever she needed from me now, whatever had prompted this outreach, it had nothing to do with maternal love and everything to do with their own needs. I told her I needed time to think and ended the call, my hands surprisingly steady. But that's when things took a turn I never saw coming. 2 days after that phone call, I received a message from an unknown number. "Brooke, this is Jessica. I know we haven't talked since high school, but I need to tell you something important. Can we meet?" Jessica, my former best friend who'd blocked me without asking questions, who'd believed Claire's lies without hesitation. My first instinct was to delete the message, but something in its urgency made me pause. We agreed to meet at a neutral coffee shop across town, and when I arrived, I barely recognized her. She looked worn down, older than 24, and her eyes were red-rimmed like she'd been crying. "I'm so sorry," she said before I'd even sat down. "I'm so incredibly sorry, Brooke. I should have believed you. I should have asked questions." Her voice cracked, and she pulled out her phone with shaking hands. "Claire confessed. Not to your family, not publicly, but she told me everything when she was drunk last month. She made it all up. The money, the drugs, everything. She was jealous of you, of how much your mom loved you, of your grades and your future. She wanted you gone, and she succeeded." The words hit me like physical blows, even though part of me had always known the truth. Hearing it confirmed after 5 years felt surreal, vindicating and devastating all at once. Jessica showed me her phone, a recording she'd made of Claire's drunken confession. In it, Claire's slurred voice described exactly how she'd framed me, laughing about how easy it had been, how our mother had believed her immediately. "Brooke was always so perfect," Claire said on the recording, her voice bitter. "Everyone loved her, and I was just the older sister who couldn't compete. So I got rid of her." The casual cruelty in her tone, the complete lack of remorse, made my blood run cold. Jessica explained that she'd shown this recording to a few people from our old friend group. That word was spreading, and that's why my mother had suddenly reached out. Not from genuine remorse, but because Claire's reputation was crumbling and the family needed damage control. For 5 years, I'd lived with a shadow of doubt, not about my innocence, but about whether anyone would ever know the truth. Now I had proof, undeniable evidence in a recording that captured Claire's malice in her own words. I sat in that coffee shop listening to the recording 3 times, watching Jessica cry and apologize profusely, and felt a strange emptiness where I'd expected triumph to be. This was the vindication I'd fantasized about during those early months of homelessness and struggle, the proof that I'd deserved better. Yet hearing it now, with 5 years of distance and growth between me and that scared 17-year-old, it felt almost anticlimactic. Jessica told me everything else she'd learned. Claire had developed a serious drinking problem over the past 2 years, had dropped out of college, and was living back at home with our mother and Richard. The guilt, or perhaps just the weight of maintaining the lie, had apparently eaten away at her, though not enough to prompt a genuine confession or apology to me. She'd only admitted the truth in moments of drunken vulnerability, never when sober, never directly to the people she'd manipulated. Our mother, according to Jessica, had learned about the confession through the neighborhood gossip network and was now in damage control mode, trying to reconnect with me before I heard the truth from other sources. I thanked Jessica for her honesty, for finally choosing the right side, even if it was 5 years too late. She asked if I could forgive her, and I told her the truth. I didn't know yet, but I appreciated her courage in reaching out. As I drove home that evening, I felt the full complexity of the situation settling over me. I had proof of my innocence, leverage if I wanted to use it, and a choice to make about what came next. The old Brooke might have rushed to confront them, to wave this evidence in their faces and demand acknowledgement. But the woman I'd become understood that real power wasn't in proving them wrong. It was in deciding whether they deserved access to my life at all. I decided to meet with them, but only on my terms. I sent my mother a brief message. I know about Claire's confession. If you want to talk, we meet at a public place. All 3 of you, this Saturday at 2 p.m. Otherwise, we have nothing to discuss. Her response came within minutes. Desperate, agreeing to anything, asking if we could meet sooner. I didn't reply. Saturday would give them time to sit with their guilt, to understand that I was no longer the powerless teenager they'd discarded. I chose a restaurant near my apartment, on my territory, where I felt strong and grounded. When Saturday arrived, I dressed in one of my professional work outfits, a tailored blazer and dress pants that announced I'd become someone who commanded respect. I arrived exactly on time and found them already seated in a booth, looking smaller than I remembered. My mother had aged noticeably, new lines around her eyes and mouth. Richard looked diminished, thinner, his previously confident posture replaced with something that looked like shame. And Claire looked wrecked. Her eyes were hollow, her skin pale, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped a water glass. They all stood when I approached, but I gestured for them to sit, taking my own seat across from them with the calm confidence of someone who held all the cards. The silence stretched for a long moment before my mother spoke. "Brooke, honey, you look wonderful. We've missed you so much." I held up my hand, cutting her off. "Let's not do this," I said quietly. "Let's not pretend this is a happy reunion, or that time has somehow erased what you did. I know Claire lied. I know you've known for at least a few weeks, probably longer. And I know you reached out not because you actually missed me, but because you're worried about what I'll do with this information." My mother's face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks, but I felt nothing but a detached clarity. This was the moment I'd imagined countless times, but now that it was here, I realized the closure I needed wasn't their apology. It was my own choice about what came next. Claire spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, Brooke. I'm so sorry for what I did to you. I was jealous and stupid, and I ruined your life." Her hands shook as she wiped tears from her face, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "I've wanted to tell you the truth for years, but I was too scared, too ashamed. Every day I've lived with what I did, and it's been destroying me." I watched her fall apart across the table and felt a strange disconnect. This was my sister, someone I'd once loved, now a broken stranger whose guilt had finally caught up to her. Part of me had imagined this moment would feel satisfying, but instead, I just felt tired. My mother reached across the table toward my hand, but I pulled back. "When Claire told us the truth 6 months ago," she said, her voice cracking, "I couldn't believe what we'd done to you. We threw out our own daughter without even investigating, without giving you a chance to defend yourself. I've been sick with guilt ever since, Brooke. Richard and I both have been. We failed you in the worst possible way, and there's no excuse for that. We should have protected you, believed you, stood by you. Instead, we chose the easy path, and you paid the price. Richard nodded, his eyes glistening, but he seemed unable to find words. His silence felt appropriate. He'd never really been my father, never fought for me, and there was nothing he could say now that would change that history. I let them sit with their discomfort for a moment before responding. 6 months, I said slowly. You've known the truth for 6 months and only reached out to me a few weeks ago when people started finding out. That tells me everything I need to know about what actually motivated this meeting. My mother started to protest, but I continued. You didn't come looking for me when I was 17 and homeless. You didn't question Claire's story when it would have mattered. You chose comfort over truth, reputation over your daughter. And now you want forgiveness because the lie is finally costing you something. The words came out calmly, without anger, just stating facts. I'd processed my rage years ago. What remained was simply clarity about who these people were and what they were capable of. What do you want from us? Richard asked finally, his voice hoarse. How can we make this right? It was the question I'd been expecting, the one that revealed their fundamental misunderstanding of the situation. They still thought this was something that could be fixed with the right words or gestures, that forgiveness was a transaction I owed them once they'd apologized. I took a sip of my water, organizing my thoughts before responding. The restaurant buzzed with other people's conversations, normal families having normal meals, completely unaware of the reckoning happening in our corner booth. You can't make it right, I said simply. What you did shaped who I became, for better and worse. I built a life without you, a good life, a stable life, and I did it by learning to trust myself when everyone else abandoned me. I don't need your money, your apologies, or your presence in my life. I watched my mother's face crumble further, saw Claire begin to sob openly. But here's what I do need. I need you to understand that forgiveness isn't something you can demand or expect. It's not a prize you win by feeling bad enough. It's something I might choose to give someday, on my own timeline, if I decide you've earned it through consistent action, not words. I pulled out my phone and showed them a document I'd prepared. A list of boundaries. If you want any possibility of a relationship with me in the future, these are non-negotiable. First, Claire gets professional help for her drinking and enters therapy to address why she did what she did. Second, you both attend family therapy and work through your own issues about why you believed her so easily. Third, you give me complete space. No calls, no messages, no showing up at my home or workplace, until I'm ready to reach out, if I ever am. Fourth, you tell everyone who heard Claire's original lies the truth, publicly and completely. And fifth, you accept that even if you do all of this, I may never want a relationship with you again. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of consequences they'd spent 5 years avoiding. My mother nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. We'll do whatever you ask, Brooke. Anything. I know we don't deserve another chance, but if you're willing to even consider it someday, we'll do the work. Claire looked up from her hands, her face blotchy and swollen. I'll go to rehab, she said hoarsely. I'll tell everyone what I did. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for this, even if you never speak to me again. Richard remained quiet, but he nodded his agreement, looking older and more defeated than I'd ever seen him. Their willingness to accept my terms should have felt like victory, but instead, it just felt like the natural consequence of their choices finally catching up to them. I stood up, ready to leave this chapter behind. I'm not promising anything, I said clearly, but if you actually follow through with these boundaries, if you do the work instead of just talking about it, maybe someday we can revisit this conversation. Until then, consider this goodbye. I picked up my purse, preparing to walk out of that restaurant and back into the life I'd built. My mother stood too, her hand reaching out one more time. Brooke, please, can I just hug you? It's been 5 years, and I've missed you so much. The desperation in her voice would have broken me 5 years ago, would have made me collapse into her arms and forgive everything just to feel loved again. But I wasn't that girl anymore. No, I said gently but firmly. You lost the right to my physical affection when you chose to believe I was a drug addict and a thief without evidence. If you do the work, If you prove through actions that you've changed, maybe one day, but not today. I walked out of that restaurant with my head high, my steps steady, feeling lighter than I had in years. The confrontation I'd built up in my mind for so long was over, and I'd handled it with grace and strength. I didn't need their validation or their belated remorse. I'd already forgiven the most important person, myself, for ever believing their rejection meant I was unworthy. What happened over the next year would surprise me more than anything that had come before. Over the following months, I kept my boundaries firm, but observed from afar through Jessica, who'd become a surprising ally and friend again. She reported that Claire had indeed checked into a 30-day rehab program, then extended it to 90 days. My mother and Richard had started couples therapy and individual counseling. Most surprisingly, they'd begun telling people the truth, not just close friends, but posting a public statement on Facebook admitting that Claire had lied, that I'd been innocent, and that they'd failed me catastrophically. The post went semi-viral in our old community, with hundreds of comments ranging from supportive to harshly critical of my family. I watched these developments with cautious interest, but no emotional investment. Their redemption arc, if that's what it was, belonged to them. It wasn't about me anymore. I continued building my own life, getting promoted at work to senior marketing strategist, moving into a beautiful 2-bedroom apartment with my boyfriend Michael, and finally feeling genuinely happy rather than just stable. The trauma of my past had become something I'd integrated rather than something that defined me. I could talk about what had happened without breaking down, could acknowledge both the pain and the growth it had forced upon me. By the time a full year had passed since our restaurant meeting, my mother had sent exactly one message. On my birthday, a simple, "Happy birthday, Brooke. We're continuing the work. No response needed, just wanted you to know we're thinking of you." I appreciated the restraint, the respect for my boundaries. Jessica told me Claire had been sober for 10 months, was working part-time and volunteering at a women's shelter, trying to rebuild her own life and help others in the process. These updates softened something in me, not enough to rush toward reconciliation, but enough to acknowledge that people could change, that accountability could lead to genuine growth. Little did I know, a crisis was coming that would test whether their transformation was real or just performance. 18 months after our confrontation, my phone rang at 2 a.m. with a number I'd saved but never expected to see calling, Richard's cell phone. My heart pounded as I answered, immediately fearing the worst. "Brooke, it's your mother." Richard's voice came through, shaky and terrified. "She's had a stroke. We're at Memorial Hospital. I know you said to respect your boundaries, and I have, but she's asking for you. The doctors say the next 24 hours are critical." I sat up in bed, Michael stirring beside me, and felt my carefully constructed walls shake. This was the test I hadn't prepared for. Not reconciliation on my terms, but crisis that demanded an immediate decision. I drove to the hospital in a daze, arriving just before dawn to find Richard in the waiting room, looking devastated and exhausted. He stood when he saw me, and for the first time, I saw genuine gratitude in his eyes rather than guilt or discomfort. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "She's stable now, but it was touch and go for a while. She's been asking for you since she could speak." A nurse led me to her room, where my mother lay connected to monitors and IVs, looking fragile and small in the hospital bed. When she saw me, tears immediately filled her eyes. "Brooke," she whispered, "you came." I sat in the chair beside her bed, taking her hand carefully. It felt strange after so long without physical contact, but also achingly familiar. The hand that had braided my hair as a child, held mine on the first day of school, and eventually closed the door on me in the cold. "I'm here, Mom," I said softly. "Don't try to talk too much. Just rest." She squeezed my hand weakly, her eyes searching my face. "I love you," she managed to say. "I never stopped. I'm so sorry." The words I'd needed to hear 5 years ago finally arrived, not in a calculated apology designed to manipulate, but in a moment of genuine vulnerability when she thought she might be dying. Something in my chest that had been locked tight for years began, very slowly, to open. I stayed at that hospital for 3 days while my mother recovered. Claire came too, sober and clear-eyed, and we had our first real conversation in 6 years. Not about forgiveness or the past, but about who we'd both become. She told me about her journey through recovery, about facing the ugly parts of herself that had led to such cruelty. "I destroyed you because I was destroying myself," she said quietly. "And watching you survive and thrive despite what I did has been the hardest and most important lesson of my life." We weren't ready to be sisters again, might never be, but we could at least be honest with each other. That felt like more than I'd expected. Abandoning me didn't destroy me, it refined me. As I sat in that hospital room, I realized the full truth of this. Yes, being thrown out at 17 had been traumatic, had marked me in ways that would never fully fade, but it had also forced me to discover strength I didn't know I possessed, to build a life based on my own values rather than inherited expectations, to learn that I could survive anything because I'd already survived the worst. The person I'd become, confident, independent, resilient, had been forged in that cold January night and every difficult day that followed. They'd thought rejection would break me, but it freed me from needing their approval to know my worth. Their biggest mistake was assuming I would stay small. My mother made a full recovery over the following weeks, and we began the slow, careful process of rebuilding something new, not the mother-daughter relationship we'd had before, but something more honest and boundaried. I didn't move back into their lives. I allowed them supervised visits into mine. Claire and I met monthly for coffee, awkward at first, gradually finding a cautious friendship. Richard apologized properly, acknowledging he'd failed me as a stepfather, and I accepted his words without promising more than civility. The family we became wasn't the one I'd lost. It was smaller, more honest, built on accountability rather than obligation. And I'd learned the most important lesson of all, that the people who abandon you reveal their own limitations, not yours. The cold that bit my skin that January night had actually been the fire that forged who I was always meant to become. If you were pushed away unfairly, this story is for you. If you're standing in your own version of that cold January night right now, wondering how you'll survive what feels unsurvivable, I need you to hear this. You will not only survive, you will become someone stronger than you ever imagined possible. The people who abandoned you made a choice that revealed who they are, not who you are. Their failure to see your worth doesn't diminish it. It just means they were looking through the wrong lens. I know it doesn't feel like it now, but that rejection is giving you something powerful. The opportunity to build a life based entirely on your own values, free from the weight of their expectations. After hearing my story, what would you have done in my place? Would you have confronted them the moment you had proof of your innocence, or would you have walked away completely and never looked back? Do you believe people can truly change after causing that kind of damage, or is some betrayal simply unforgivable? I want to know your thoughts. Drop them in the comments below, because your perspective matters and your story matters. If you've experienced family betrayal, abandonment, or being blamed for something you didn't do, you're not alone. There are thousands of us who've walked this path and come out the other side. Was I wrong for setting such strict boundaries with my family? Or should I have been even firmer? Do you think I should have accepted their apology sooner? Or was my timeline exactly right? Let me know in the comments what you would have done differently. And if you want more stories like this, real, raw stories about survival, revenge, betrayal, and ultimately finding yourself when everything falls apart, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Don't miss the next video where I'll share another incredible true story about someone who turned their darkest moment into their greatest strength. Thank you for listening to my story. It took me years to be ready to share it, and knowing you heard it means everything. I'll see you in the next video.